I wish I could take a break for 8 weeks and make a film at the same time, he said with a laugh. The whole world has opened up to me, but it's too late. It's too late. When asked to elaborate, the 80-year-old Oscar winner said, I'm old. I read stuff. I see things. I want to tell stories, and there's no more time. Kurosawa, when he got his Oscar, when George and Stephen gave it to him, he said, I'm only now beginning to see the possibility of what cinema could be. And it's too late. He was 83. At the time I said, what does he mean? Now I know what he means. Martin Scorsese, Vanity Fair, May 16th, 2023. There are certain figures in the world of cinema, world cinema, and at this point, American filmmaking is world cinema. It's seen throughout the world. It's a commentary on who we are. It is the thing that speaks to people and lets them know, whether good or bad, whether right or wrong, exaggerated or lacking, the image that we put out to the world. It's who we are. It's the culture. Martin Scorsese, who is now 80 years old, has premiered his latest film, possibly his last film. Nobody really knows. That film is an adaptation of David Grann's 2017 nonfiction bestseller, Killers of the Flower Moon. I went into this film with a great deal of worry, trepidation. When you follow a filmmaker like this for the better part of 3 decades, there is a fear that there's going to be a stumble, and there is a fear that the work is not going to live up to your expectations. Nowhere is this more striking in my love of cinema than with the work of Martin Scorsese. I'm pleased to say that I have not been disappointed in the films that I've seen. Some are better than others, but for the most part, they are all quality, exceptional films. Killers of the Flower Moon is no exception. Killers of the Flower Moon is a film that, when Scorsese speaks of the great Japanese director Kurosawa, he does so with an attempt to understand the true meaning of cinema. I'm only now beginning to see the possibility of what cinema could be, and it's too late. Those are old man words. And for an old man who was in his 40s or perhaps 50 at the time that was said, to not understand that and only come to terms with it as he reaches 80, it's telling and inspiring. And with this film, this is a much different Martin Scorsese than we have ever seen in his filmography. And I would argue is a film that is heavily influenced by cinema itself, which has always been the case, but current cinema, as Scorsese has cited the influence of Ari Aster's Midsommar and Beau Travail. I'm not sure. Beau was Afraid, I think, is the last film. This is a much slower, much more meditative Martin Scorsese than any of us are used to. Is this film a masterpiece? I don't know. I've only seen it once. And to throw out the word masterpiece would be irresponsible for us as film critics. I will say that watching the film, I felt as though I was seeing something that was. I was seeing something that was game changing, even if it was only game changing within the world of his filmography. That being said, we start off this month, November, my birthday month, with an examination of 5 films that I feel had a major influence on my look at both movies and life. And I wanted to start out with this possibly last Martin Scorsese picture. As always, my co-host Mr. Chavez joins me, and I'm very eager to hear his opinion and find out his take on both this material and its presentation. Mr. Chavez, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Please, let me know what your feelings are regarding this new film.
I didn't know what to expect. When we went to go see The Irishman,
Yes.
however many years ago that was, it was a thing. We went to the Egyptian. We stood in line. We stood in line with other connoisseurs, right?
Yeah.
We saw the film. I think it was for the Irishman that I think I was on my way to the bathroom or something, and I heard someone whistling the theme from Lawrence of Arabia. And when you're headed to take a piss and you hear the theme of Lawrence of Arabia and you recognize it, you know that you're in a different place. You're in a basically you're in a temple to the history of film. We saw the film after we went, had a steak, and a drink, talked, and there was a logic to what could then have been the last Scorsese film. There was a logic to have that be the crowning achievement or the coda. There's a good and obvious logic to it. Having De Niro there, bringing back Pesci, but in a different type of role. Someone described Joe Pesci in a review as a revelation, I think.
Yeah.
Getting Pacino and De Niro to work well together. They hadn't worked well. They've only done it a couple times. They did it well in Heat, and then I think Righteous Kill is the other name of the film that didn't work so well at all. It would have made sense to have The Irishman as the end. Well, it's not the end. We got this film. This film was more ambitious. So I didn't know what to expect. You talk about more ponderous films. I am going in different directions in terms of my viewing habits. I tend to enjoy and really revel in what some people describe as slow cinema. Slow cinema slow cinema that feels long and slow, that is meditative, that sometimes some people can say it's pretentious or what have you. I'm really getting more and more interested in Peter Greenaway. And there's a quote of his where he just uses Scorsese as an example, because Peter Greenaway is calling, or has spent his whole career calling for, a different type of approach to cinema that is more visual, and less tied to text, so that film should work the way a painting works, but obviously with movement, music, etc. He says Scorsese still makes the same kind of movies as the way that W.D. Griffith did, and so I was thinking of that quote when I was going into this film, and that's okay. There are different types of film. I didn't know what I was going to see, and I also was anticipating our discussion, because there was also part of me, and forgive me, this did creep into my mind. I'm like, it can go a number of different ways. It can be something where Rick, and this is me talking to myself,
Mm-hmm.
Rick can feel let down, maybe.
Yeah.
Or it's also possible, and this is possible for all of us. What if Rick is so close to Scorsese that he overblows it?
Mm-hmm.
He inflates what happens, and how will that conversation turn out? If that's my opinion.
Both thoughts that played through my head before, during, and after the film. Those things,
because
both.
It's there, right? Yeah.
It would be. I would not be good at this if I wasn't aware of it. If I just looked at a Scorsese and dismissed everything that was wrong with what he does, or to exalt him to a level of godlike artistic power, then you wouldn't be able to take me seriously. You wouldn't be able to listen to what I say about it with any kind of sense of truth and understanding of the material. That is not lost on me. You are absolutely correct there.
I'm sitting there watching this movie. Leslie and I are sitting there watching this movie already with a heavy vibe because of what's happening in Gaza,
Yeah,
etc. It's just tense. I mean, it's always tense all over the world because of shit, and it's always land and etc. But obviously, the subject matter is this is heavy stuff, and so we're sitting there, and I'm watching, and I'm right away I'm noticing, and I had heard about Scorsese citing Ari Aster as in terms of how he influenced the pacing.
yeah,
and how, with Schoonmaker, the editor, his longtime editor, and that made me think of, and I'm trying to not think of all these things, but I'm also thinking them, but I'm also watching this movie and enjoying, right?
yeah.
And I'm thinking about what you've talked about with Tarantino and his editor. I forgot her name.
Sally Menke.
That once she passed away, that's when there was a marked turn, right?
Yeah.
For better, for worse, whatever. His films did change when she passed away.
Yes.
And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the shots, and I'm looking at the, like, how long are these different moments? How long are these different takes? And I'm feeling the time pass, and I'm watching this story unfold, and I'm like, the Scorsese is achieving something, and then once having seen the whole film, having gone through that process, I think he achieved something that it's an interesting thing. It wasn't this was not slow cinema. It wasn't a slow film. But he managed to make a long film that didn't feel long. Different from Paul Thomas Anderson, who makes long films, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
he managed to get a 3.5 hour film, which is Act 1, the meeting, courtship; Act 2, killings; Act 3, trial; then epilogue, radio play. He managed to keep it moving. The scenes weren't very long, shots weren't very long. He would keep moving it, and then he would throw in something different. So there would be a shot on a train, and it's like, well, there's something about this looks very 90s to me. There would be a shot of there were moments. That's why I'm interested in, well, everything that you're going to say, but I'm interested in this idea of that he really uses this film as an homage to cinema itself, because there are different moments where I'm like, this looks like Terrence Malick.
Mm-hmm.
This looks like, you see these different moments and you see influences. And again, going back to Tarantino, it's a way of doing homage that's different than, at some point decades ago, they used to call it biting. When you bite somebody,
Mm-hmm.
meant that you ape them, you imitate them, you steal, you're copying them. It's not that. It's different. I think that this is an achievement not only for Scorsese, but for his editor. I think this is, it's a work of pacing. It's an artistic work of pacing.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you on all of that level. I think the problem with Scorsese is not so much a problem with Scorsese as our reading of his work, our understanding of the films that he does. Too often, Scorsese is considered a violent director and a director of mob films, when in fact the mob films, Mean Streets, Goodfellas, Casino, The Irishman, Raging Bull to a degree. There's an aspect of the mob in that,
Yeah.
but not an it is an overpowering one, but it's not the drive of the story. He is oftentimes what I would consider dismissed as merely a violence mob director, when in fact this is a man who made After Hours, The King of Comedy, Cape Fear, Silence. He's Hugo, Bringing Out the Dead. This is a man with a diverse painting style. And I think that
Kundun.
Kundun, yeah. I think what gets lost is, as great as Goodfellas, Casino, Raging Bull, as great as the mob films are, they're easily described. They're easily taken in, or at least on the surface, they're easy to watch and to say, well, this is what it is. This is Scorsese's perverse sense of humor. This is his delight and love of violence, and being able to really really manipulate an audience in their viewing, taking them from heights of laughter, black comedy laughter, to a hopeless seriousness that you see in both Goodfellas, Casino,
I mean, Taxi Driver,
yeah.
hopeless seriousness.
It's exactly that. It's an examination. I don't think it's a conscious effort on his part in Killers of the Flower Moon to break away from that and to say, I'm going to be a different filmmaker now. And this is not an apology for anything that has come before. But the violence in this film is much more profound and much more unsettling. Number one, because it is real people, even though Casino and Goodfellas were real people. The fact is that this is more than just real people being victimized. This is cultural. And the sins of the United States against the Osage people they're very strong in this film. And as you watch it, I remember leaning over to my mom and saying, this is not going to help me. This is not going to help me.
This is not going to help me?
This is not going to help me.
Oh, help them.
No, me. This is not going to
Okay.
help me with my anger and my prejudices and my resentment and bitterness about things. And that's a very superficial thing to say. Because I know my attitude about this is not something that necessarily affects me outside of the human condition of seeing this. But this is a film that is, at this point, an end cap to my introduction to this world with Peter Mathiassen's In the Spirit of Crazy Horse. Well, actually, Michael Apted's Incidental Glala, which led into Spirit of Crazy Horse, which was carried through with Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and any number of reading that I have done that has formed my attitude about humanity, the government, and the species as a whole. This film was depressing. This film was sad. I got the sense that there was a level of hopelessness there, that there is no happy ending in this movie. There is no moment of justice being served. And that breaks your heart. It breaks your will. The spirit is trampled on. And I understand there have been some people who have not necessarily come out. There have been people who have come out against this film, but there have been mostly people who say it's a beautifully made film. It's a beautifully realized film. However, it's not an Osage film. And that's an argument that I would back. But that's not what the film is. And that's to defend Martin Scorsese in this matter. He is focusing on the sin, not necessarily those who it was committed against. But he doesn't short shift them. His sympathies are there, but as a white director, or any director that wouldn't be Osage, exactly, yeah. With any director who was not Osage, how would you be able to get to the heart of the Osage experience in this? So what you have here is, as he called it, this is not a whodunit. This is a who didn't do it. A blanket statement of all people that were involved in the victimization of the Osage community and the burial of this story for so many years. Because even when I told you about this story, I had never heard about it until I heard that he was making this film about 2.5, 3 years ago. I picked up the book about 3 months ago and I read it. And then I told you about it. You knew the movie was coming out, but you didn't know this story, did you?
No, I knew the story, but I didn't know the movie was coming out.
Oh, okay. I thought you didn't know the story. I thought you didn't know the history of this. Suffice to say,
I learned about it in university.
Oh, so you did hear him? Okay, all right. I'm mistaken. I apologize.
No, yeah, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that that he was working on. I don't know when people are doing movies.
Yeah.
So it was just like interesting. You know what I mean? Like again, to the biases that we have towards Scorsese, it's like, oh, Scorsese's doing that. Okay. You know?
Well, that was my biggest fear, because it would be really easy for a white director to become apologetic about this kind of material and do so in a fashion to make the main character, the Leonardo DiCaprio character, sympathetic. The sympathy for the character comes in the understanding that he probably did love this woman, Molly. This Osage woman, Molly.
Yeah, he probably learned to love her.
He probably did.
Yeah,
But it doesn't excuse the fact of his actions.
of course.
And I think he doesn't. Well, what I mean is, Scorsese doesn't try to excuse his actions, and Scorsese doesn't try to paint him with a brush of sympathy. He doesn't condemn him, but what he does is almost as bad. He makes him a completely weak character. This is a weak man. This is a greedy, easily manipulated, I wouldn't even call him a snake of a man. I would call him he's a cockroach. He's a fucking horrible human being, but in a much different way than his uncle, King William Hale, played by Robert DeNiro in this film.
I disagree a little bit there because I think he gives because I feel that Scorsese gave DiCaprio's character enough agency to be responsible. Because if you're just completely manipulated by someone else,
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, okay, well, Charles Manson got me to do it, or
Yeah.
Whoever got me to do it, and I was brainwashed, or I was manipulated, or I was this, or I was that. So go after him. I'm also a victim.
Well, I would I could agree with your reading of that, of what I just said. I don't excuse his behavior. I still think he's responsible. I still think that you have to rise above your weakness. Even a weak man or woman has the ability to stand up against what they know is wrong.
And I'm not making like any value judgment on it, or I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying, based on what you're saying, I think that Scorsese, in working on this character, based on this real life person, I think he understood that, yes, he was also a victim. And I think that's the aspect of, like, thematically, as a side note, like, these films are this film is different from other films that he may have made, in terms, if you look at, like, The Raging Bulls, the Goodfellas, Taxi Driver, Mean Streets. But the themes, the subject is different, but the themes are similar. There's guilt, greed, Mean Streets, guilt, loss of humanity, Taxi Driver, self-destruction, Raging Bull, greed, Goodfellas, and what that does to the family. Thematically, it's the same. I just think that it's one of those things where Travis Bickle and what's Keitel's character's name?
Which one? In Main Streets?
In Taxi Driver.
Sport.
In Sport. They're both fucked up.
Yeah.
The King Hale character is the mastermind. But everybody's guilty. In terms of this murder. And I was thinking about what you just mentioned in terms of it's not an Osage story. That would be, and I was going to ask you about this, and I'm asking you about it, is when we saw Roma.
Yeah, that was one of the complaints I had about that film.
That was and that was something that it was as if you were screaming in the theater to me. Inside joke. From what I remember, your critique was, and give it more clarity or whatever, but does the indigenous female character really have a voice? Or is she just there to illustrate the experiences of this other character? And so I wanted to ask you, and I mean, you already kind of touched on it,
yeah.
but I wanted to ask you how you would feel about that if I shine that critique back at you in terms of this.
I get what you're saying, and absolutely, but this is a different type of film, and the difference is that with what Cuarón, I think it was Alejandro Cuarón, right, that did that film, Alfonso Cuarón, or
I
was
think
it
so.
Iñárritu?
I don't think it was Iñárritu. I think it was Cuarón.
Cuarón. Okay, so Roma was Cuarón.
All Mexicans are the same, you know?
Those light-skinned Spanish Mexicans, of course. Yeah. But
Um,
but the critique that I had with that was that was a film that was centered. Every aspect of that film was centered on her and the maid, her experience taking care of that family. And I thought it was an idealized view of her saintliness. And when you do something like that, it's not as it really isn't as understanding and in depth as one would like to believe. I think Cuarón believes, and I think he's a great filmmaker, but with that particular film, I think he believes that he was making an homage, not an homage,
like
he
a
was
love
making a
letter
love
to
letter.
her.
Yes, a love letter. He was making a love letter to this woman that cared for him.
Yeah, because
An
he's
upper
the boy.
class. Yeah, he was the boy. An upper class, well taken care of young man, boy into teenager into an adult
Yeah,
by
from the
this,
Mexican elite.
yeah, from the Mexican elite by this Mexican
Yeah,
Indian woman. And the problem that I had with the film is that the film was centered around her, and I never felt like it was really her story. I felt like it was his memories of her. What's
and that's
different?
basically what it is.
Yeah, and it
That is
is.
what it is.
And for that, it's good. It's good, but it's making assumptions on what she
Right. It's filtered
experienced and
through
believed.
his
Yes.
views. Yeah.
That's not what Killers of the Flower Moon is. Whether Scorsese did this intentionally or not, he told an Osage story, but with the Osage almost purely secondary characters and their victimization. This story centers around Leonardo DiCaprio's Earl
Yeah.
Burkhart's
He's the Henry Hill.
yes, his weakness. So the film, it doesn't try, I don't think it overplays its hand in understanding the tribe or Lily. She is the you don't
Molly.
Molly. I'm sorry, Molly. Lily Gladstone, the who gives a
Yeah.
really great performance in this, and it's a very difficult performance because she's basically dying from beginning to the end of the film. She's sickly in the beginning, and then she's slowly being poisoned throughout the film, and it's a hard thing to watch, especially if it would be difficult to get away from. It would be very difficult, almost impossible, if you are a conscious and if you give a shit about history and the injustices perpetrated against so many different groups of people, whether it be Asians, Latins, blacks, or in this case, Native Americans in this country. Unless you're one of these people who just wants to say, well, that was a long time ago. Let's look past it. Let's just get on with our lives and do this. And I hear that argument all the fucking time, and it's a real difficult one to reconcile with, but I have to, because I know it's out there. I have to. Otherwise, you spend your life screaming into the wind. It's kind of hopeless in that sense. But with this particular film, the Osage are a side story. This is a Columbo episode, basically. You know who has done what they've done, and now it's a matter of figuring out how they're going to bring it to justice. That's every Columbo episode that has ever been made. You know who the killer is. You know how the killer committed the crime. You know how the killer committed the murder. Now it's a matter of watching Peter Falk's Columbo put the pieces together. In this case, it's watching the slow genocidal murder of these people.
And it's just sorry.
Go ahead.
It's a microcosm. What's
Yes.
happening in this community is just a microcosm of what happened in history.
Well, what happened on the overwork, with the Sioux, with the Arapaho, with the Navajo, with the Apache, with all these different groups. Maybe not the Navajo, but definitely all of these different hundreds.
On some level, it's like it's millions of people that I mean, that's just in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah.
Let's just do a 3-minute walkthrough of how we got here to this story. You have pre-contact, right?
Yeah.
Once you have Spanish contact in the late 15th
Caribbean,
century,
yeah.
You get to, and I'm just going to do an overview. Is that's what leads to enslavement, genocide, displacement, etc.
Sure.
Spain and Portugal colonize what becomes Latin America and the American Southwest.
Yeah.
France colonizes Canada, parts of the French West Indies, Louisiana, etc. The Dutch are in the Northeast, and the British there with colonies as well. You get, from the beginning, what happens is there's fighting, the colonials versus the indigenous, Powhatan, Jamestown, Pocahontas, all that. You get the Pueblo Revolt in against the Spanish in New Mexico in the late 1600s, the French Indian Wars, and you get westward expansion. In that westward expansion, you start to we start to get to treaties between tribes as sovereign nations and what is developing into the United States. Some of these treaties, the words are, we're not going to take your land as long as the grass grows and the waters flow. Cross our fingers. These tribes are considered sovereign nations. You get to Andrew Jackson, and then you have what? You have the Indian problem. So you get the Indian Removal Act. So you displace native groups and you put them on reservations. Part of this is also Louisiana Purchase. It pushes a lot of Native Americans west. As westward expansion is going, also Native Americans are getting pushed west. Trail of Tears, march them to these new places. Fort Laramie Treaty, major treaties in the plains. The Dawes Act, and the Indian Reorganization Act. Now you have in the United States taking a ward develops into a ward relationship with these tribes. They describe it as a fiduciary responsibility that Congress has over them. You put them on these Dawes rolls. So now you're looking at lineage and you're looking at percentage of Indianness on these Dawes rolls. You also get boarding schools where you take children from their families and you send them far away to a school so they will learn to be civilized. Mm-hmm. You kill the Indian and you save the child is the phrasing. The Native Americans are now under federal protection under the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So all of this is happening throughout. Certain tribes, and they mention this in the film, they describe how the Osage were never one of the 5 civilized tribes. The Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole.
Mm-hmm.
Groups that showed signs of proper assimilation of religion, of farming and horticulture, etc. So what ends up happening with the Osage in particular is they're put on reservation land, but they sell that land and they relocate to a part of Indian territory that they buy from the Cherokee. So they get a little bit more control over over those lands. Then oil is discovered. So because they are basically wards of the U.S. government, they're considered incompetent. So a certain number, based on the Dawes rolls, there's land allotments. There's also Oklahoma this is around the time of like moving towards statehood, etc. Certain tribal members, they get head rights on oil shares. Then what starts to happen? Well, now Native American females start to get courted by members of the white male community. Then what happens? Well, then they start to die.
Yeah.
This is also around the time in Oklahoma. Remember the Tulsa massacre? Mm-hmm. This is early 20s. So race riot that's killing the Black Wall Street, what was called the Black Wall Street. This is the early days of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover. So there's still a little bit of kind of like this Wild West attitude of like cowboys versus Indians, but then mixed in a little bit of this is the 20s, so this is early FBI shit. This is like, they ask, are you Pinkertons? What are you? This is the Bureau of Investigation. I don't even think it had merged. Like it didn't become the full-fledged Federal Bureau of Investigation yet, but it's like an early version of it that's operating on a federal level.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, you zoom in from hemispheric genocidal level to Midwest Oklahoma, to the Osage, to these families, these characters, and then you see the dynamic. And then you get to the murder mystery.
It's all of that is in this film. There's a whole history of Native American white relations in this country embodied in this film. We talk a little bit about it in episode 168, A Survey of Native American Cinema, where we talk about Little Big Man, Dancing with Wolves, and a documentary called Real Injuns. And we also talk a little bit about it in episode 165, Leonard Peltier, John Trudell, and the American Indian Movement, from both of those 2018. So, this has been the presence of the American Indian in cinema is one of many, many years. It's very interesting to me that they went from caricatures to somewhat fully fleshed out. You could make the argument that these are just cardboard figures in their own story. But until, but that's not an issue against Martin Scorsese or the filmmakers of this film. That's a that's something to come out against the industry as a whole. So I don't want to come across like I'm excusing any aspect of this film um, that should be criticized. But the fact of the matter is that this is not the film. The film is an examination of the murders. And we do get to know this woman. We get to know this Molly um, pretty intimately, I think. We see what's happening to her. We see the love of her for her sisters, her mother, her children, and the slow murder that she's experiencing. In a weird way, it's a lot. It's in the great tradition of American cinema where women are driven mad, or done away with in such a manner. I mean, Gaslight with Ingrid Bergman really jumped into my mind when I was watching this film.
I mean, and that's the term
Mhm.
that's in the cultural lexicon right now is, when you're
Yeah,
gaslighting somebody, that's where it comes from.
yeah, convincing them of something that convincing them of a falsehood, convincing them of their own insanity. This woman is slowly being poisoned. And at one point, I went to see this with my mom. I took her to see this, um, and she did ask me at the end. She was like, "Do you think he knew what he was doing? Do you think because there's a point where the doctor stopped giving her the injections. She's a diabetic. The woman is Molly is a diabetic, a disease that afflicts a great number of Native people,
Yeah,
even
because of the
especially today,
introduction of fucking sugar.
because of the introduction of there is a moment when the doctor says you can't eat like a white person. You remember that? Did you hear that?
I do. Yeah, I did remember that.
It was like wow, wow. But there is something to be said about the introduction of all of these
Yeah, alcohol,
mhm.
smallpox.
Small, yeah, well, yeah, all of this into the culture that slowly wears away at the people and destroys them the outside in, and the inside out. Um, but like I kept, I'm not sure with the DiCaprio character, Ernest Burkhart. I wasn't ever really sure how complicit he was in all of the murderous action. He was definitely involved in the murder of her family. I don't know how involved he was or how aware he was of his slow murder of her. Does that make sense? Do you
It does make sense. I think he was more. I think he was more aware of it than I think maybe you think he was.
I think that he was aware but didn't want to believe he was doing it. I think the mind can play
Sure,
tricks on people, and
sure.
we
Yeah,
can
I mean,
bullshit ourselves into believing something that we know is not true.
yes, he could. He was giving her the full vial of that, that
What was it?
poison
Was
that
it
they use on the
laudanum or
side.
was it poison? I don't know what it was.
I'm not sure. And even at one point, in a fit of guilt, he drinks some of it himself.
Mm-hmm.
He
Yeah.
puts it in his whiskey and drinks it. And I mean, yeah, he's. That's the thing, is that it's ultimately not about Molly. It's a story about him,
Yes.
his character arc,
Mm-hmm.
um, and
What I
how he
like
has
though,
to go ahead.
what I like though, is that they don't. Scorsese and his co-screenwriter Eric Roth do not make an attempt to redeem this character. He's not a good man, and they don't make excuses for him, and it doesn't end. Spoiler alert, but it does not end well. And it's never like, oh, he realizes his mistake. He goes to the tribal community and begs forgiveness, and they forgive him. That would have been the film 40 years ago. Or at least an attempt at that film. He is as horrible as you can imagine. And yet, any kind of sympathy that you have for him is because he's paralleled to his uncle, a character, King Bill Hale, which is, I think, a really understated performance.
It is.
On De Niro's part, because, and especially in the last few years when we've talked about De Niro cashing checks, this is not that.
I mean, De Niro's been doing that for decades at this point.
At this point, yeah. I hate to say it, but yeah. His being a sort of idol of mine as far as cinema is concerned, it's very hard to reconcile with that fact. But I'd be bullshitting and I'd be lying if I didn't recognize it and comment on it. With this performance, though, I kept waiting for bravado that never came, and I was so happy that it didn't come, because what he did was he made the relationship between himself and the Osage Nation plausible. And my mom and I were walking out of the theater, and she was commenting on it, like, why would they trust him? And I said, because he endeared himself to them. He was Nino Brown, giving away turkeys at Christmas, building hospitals, building schools, basically taking a small percentage of what he was going to steal to fund the thievery. And this is how magnates and robber barons got away with what they did for as long as they did. Look at the Carnegie. I mean, all of these people who became philanthropists in their late 80s and 90s in order to wipe their sins away from the history books. What Hale did was he was wiping away the footprints as they were happening in order to continue his robbing and thievery. And with this film, I think De Niro could have easily played it twirling mustache and pure evil. And he didn't do that. He made the character grandfatherly and likable. And I think it was the perfect choice.
But at the same time, you know that he's evil. And
you know that with retrospect, though. You know it because you're privy to it. And I told my mom this. We were talking about it. It was like, when you're surrounded by people that are fucking you all the time, he seemed to be a bastion of a little bit of good, even though he was condescending to them and treated them like children as well.
Of course.
He was not as bad. So I could understand where the Osage, after being beaten down so badly, could suffer a bit of Stockholm syndrome and invest some feeling of trust and belief in this man who provided hospitals, who provided medicine in some cases, who provided, who seemed to be encouraging their wealth. It's
and
evil.
At the same time, they knew, they knew what they described as an epidemic. They knew that they were being picked off.
Yeah.
The women themselves knew it. They comment on it in the film. Oh, look, he's like a coyote. He just wants money. Yeah, he wants money, but it's kind of like it's this strange relationship to one's own destruction.
Yeah.
Where you're trying to you're trying to hold it back. You're trying to hold it at bay for as long as possible, and you're trying to look at certain individuals. You're trying to look at the good in them because you don't trust anyone, or you don't trust them because they just want our oil. They just want our oil money, and when look at the character that's murdered in the woods, Annie, I think her name is. She's drunk. Yeah. She's volatile. Her last words are, "You're gonna kill me."
Yeah.
And it's not even said with outrage. It's said with this kind of like partly dismissive, partly kind of it's frustrated, but it's there's a kind of resignation to it. You're just gonna fucking kill me, like fuck you, like you're full of shit, and then she gets blown away.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is a knowledge of like, look at Molly and Ernest. I don't know that I can fully trust you, but you're the only one that I can kind of trust.
Yeah.
And you're the one that's taking care of me, so I kind of just have to take the medicine. And that's a metaphor for the government and the native peoples as a whole. In the same way that's Ernest's relationship to his uncle as well. You're the one that's controlling everything. You're the hand this is the hand that feeds me, so I kind of, when you're telling me to sign this paper, I kind of have to sign it, even though I know you're going to fuck me. And what do you mean if something happens to me? What's going to happen to me? Well, just sign it. Just sign it. In a way, going back to De Niro's performance, it's a more realistic version of what, when De Niro plays Vito, a young Vito in Godfather 2,
mm-hmm.
he's doing good deeds. The dog is going to stay.
Mm-hmm.
The rent stays the same. Call me if you need something. Blah, blah, blah. In the evolution of that character, he becomes Marlon Brando's version, right? And that's the romanticized. A more realistic version is that young Vito becomes like a King Hale.
Yeah.
That's what he is. He's doing favors for people, but it's always with a caveat. It's not, I'm not just helping you out. I'm helping myself. I'm investing.
I'm buying something. I'm buying your soul, basically. And the sad thing is, it's there's a difference in it, though. And it's a difference that it's when a young Vito or a young Jimmy Conway does it, it's hustling, it's getting over, it's fuck you, pay me, it's getting ahead. This is different because what this is believing that the Osage and all native people are children, undeserving, animalistic savages. They don't deserve the wealth that is bestowed upon them. It is our right as white men to go in there and take it and manage it.
It's not only our right, it's our burden, it's our responsibility.
One thing that I don't think Scorsese really conveyed as powerfully as he could have was the paternalship of whites assisting the native people to get their money.
Yeah, the guardianship aspect.
The guardianship aspect. It was something that was it was there, but it was glossed over. And I thought
it was kind of just accept, like, this is accepted. Mm-hmm. It's not really, they don't explain it, but it's kind of like Yeah, it's
But
why do you
I
have to
wanted,
ask for your own money?
yeah, exactly. Like you have to go and, is that really enough to spend? Can you really justify? Well, it's my fucking money. Why can't I spend it? And the one instance was a drunk Indian going into the bank to fight for his money. And in a weird way, it just kind of, that moment, you don't lead up to the frustration that gets him there. He's simply he's simply the drunk Indian stereotype that can't be trusted with the money because he's gonna spend it on alcohol.
Yeah, he's the drunken Ira Hayes.
Yeah, he's gonna spend it on vice. It's not gonna go towards anything good. Whereas if they could have built up to that, I think that would have served that part of the story a little bit better. Because we're introduced to that character right in the beginning. He's the character that picks up Ernest at the train station and takes him to his land.
Yeah, his land.
Yeah,
Whose land is this?
it's my
Mine.
land. Yeah. And I would have liked to see it's little things like that they could have fleshed out. And if you're telling me that you can't find a native person that could have played that role, well, I don't think Wes Studi is retired right now. I don't think Graham Greene is retired right now. If you wanted a name and you wanted somebody who had the chops, you could have hired either of those two guys. It's a shame that the only films that you can see them are, usually like that. It's like I have to have a native film to see these two great actors, and they're nowhere to be
Right.
seen. You know what I mean? Where the point of it is that if the idea is it had to be a smaller part of the story because we couldn't find somebody who could do it. There were people who could have done it. That's my point with that. But that's a complaint that I have about the film. But it's a film can't do everything. It can't be all things to all people. And it's ridiculous to imagine that it can do that. If anything, what I hope that a film like this does is it spurs the imagination and the curiosity to go out and find. First of all, read David Gann's book. Read Flowers of the Killers of the Flower Moon. It's a very interesting read. There are aspects of it that are touched on in more detail. Although visually, to see the house after it's blown up, and to see Rita, and I'm not going to give away that reveal.
Yeah.
But that was a moment where I was just like, right there, I was squeamish.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of times that I did tear up in the film. But there's part of me is also angry that a story as large as this, a story as meaningful, for 100 years to pass before a story like this gets told on any kind of massive level, that's a fucking sin. That's a sin.
And who's seeing it? How many people are fucking even seeing it?
Well, let's talk about that. This film, this is a $200 million Apple film that I know that they wish they could just release it on the streaming network and get people, but I really doubt this is a film people are going to see. And I think we've gushed about this film in a lot of respects in both the talent behind the camera, what is achieved, the cinematography is beautiful. You mentioned Malik.
Yeah, because it's Prieto
Prieto, yeah.
is the DP, right?
Mm-hmm. He's the DP. I think did he do Tree of Life?
Maybe.
Maybe. I can't remember. Regardless, it's a beautiful film. It is an incredibly beautiful film with so much to recommend it. And as I watched it, I just realized how much of history is wiped under the rug. And even though this is a major film, I don't think most audiences, definitely the people who listen to us, have the patience. But a 3.5 hour long movie in a theater is asking a lot of people today.
You said except with the exception of people who listen to us. You said, right?
Not only people who listen to us, but you know what I mean. The people who listen to
No,
us are a little bit more,
right. Okay.
people who listen to us love movies. We love movies. The people who listen to us love movies. That seems to be the audience that we attract. People who love long films. People who love nuanced storytelling and innovative filmmaking. Which is very interesting because at 80 years old, for Scorsese to for Scorsese to understand Kurosawa's words and become an even more innovative filmmaker, I think it's encouraging. But I don't see this as being a film. Number one, audiences are going to have a great deal of difficulty watching something like this without feeling put upon and guilty and on the other end of a supposed accusatory fingering. That
I mean,
that's
if
problematic for some people.
level.
If they do. But I
If
also
they even get to the point where they're like, oh, well, I mean,
yeah,
I think there's probably too much distance.
maybe, but well, that's another conversation. I think
There are no explosions. I mean, there are explosions, but there are no constant explosions in this film. There are no. It's like, and I'm not coming from this as a moralistic perspective at all. But I mean, like, there's no fucking there's no OnlyFans model. There's no fucking This is it just goes back to the Jerry Bruckheimerization of the culture.
Well, this is a real film. I mean, okay,
yeah, right.
Let's get into a little bit about what the controversy before this movie came out was. Scorsese, and we've mentioned this in the past, but I don't know
We
that
talked
we've
about
ever
it last time, I think.
Did we?
Well, go into it.
Scorsese's dismissal of, or Scorsese's seeming dismissal of, I don't consider it a dismissal, but Scorsese's seeming dismissal of Marvel films, comic book films, to a degree, Star Wars, and a lot of other shit that gets made. When he called it amusement park films, he called it.
Yeah.
I think he was wrong in saying not cinema. It is cinema. All of that is cinema.
I mean, sure. Anytime you put a fucking
yes,
you record something, a picture that moves, it's cinema.
That's
but
exactly.
He means capital C.
He
means capital C.
Well, what he's talking about, he's not even talking so much about the different. What he's talking about, in truth, is the reliance on the studios for exciting, visually. He's talking about fast food cinema that does not challenge the viewer. As good as the Marvel films are technically and beautifully made, because they absolutely are, they're empty. It's a Marvel movie, a DC movie, Star Wars, for the most part, are nothing more than Dr. Pepper. It's just soda water that gives you no nutritional value. Whereas something like this both forces you to reflect on the culture, the cultural history, who we are as a people, as well as the medium itself and the capability of the medium. So what he's talking about, as far as I read it, in a fit of anger, maybe he dismisses those films, because you got to also remember, he's fighting to get the films that he wants to make made. And after almost 50 years of filmmaking, he has proven himself as a quality filmmaker. I don't think there's an American filmmaker who is comparable to Scorsese on the level of critical success. That's not to say worldwide cinema. I'm talking about American.
Yeah.
He's probably the greatest living American filmmaker working today. If you look at his expansive filmography, you could make an argument for Nolan. You could make an argument for Fincher. You could make an argument for. You could even make an argument for Spielberg.
Wait, but isn't Christopher Nolan English?
Is he?
I believe so.
I thought he was an Anglophile. I thought he was from here, but was like an Anglophile.
Maybe he's British American. I don't know.
He might be British. I thought he was. We'll have to look that up. I thought he was from here. Well, I mean, his films are yes, but his films are funded by an American studio, almost exclusively by American studios. And that's a different conversation. Thank you for. We'll talk about it at another time. But now you threw my fucking.
But anyway,
no, it's a good point. But
well, it kind of proves your point, because it's like, well, if you're arguing Nolan, well, he has also a different sensibility.
Yeah, he does have. Yeah, well, he does have
whether people are fans of Brexit or not, like, he is still on some level connected to the European tradition.
Absolutely, I would agree
even
with
if
that.
He's from that island, you know.
I would agree with that. Yeah. But the thing here is that
so he doesn't count.
No, okay, probably not. It's a different argument. We can get into it another time. But with this,
what Scorsese even higher.
Well, what I was saying though is that Scorsese, I think there comes a point when you want to make the art that is inside of you. It's in you and it's got to come out. And filmmaking is so incredibly expensive an art form that it becomes more and more difficult to do it. And he's at a point in his career, at his age and what he wants to do, that he can no longer go back to the small films like After Hours. He couldn't make an After Hours now. And if you've seen After Hours, you know what I'm talking about. That level of truncated budget and shooting schedule, shooting at night in New York, that's a young man's film. Taxi Driver is a young man's film. Taxi Driver, once again, $1.5 million maybe. You know, Mean Streets. By the time you get to the Scorsese of Cape Fear and Casino, he has to work with a bigger budget because the vision is so much bigger. And because you can't just run out there, get the shot, and get the hell back in. Scorsese today couldn't make The Last Temptation of Christ. Scorsese today couldn't make Goodfellas. Not for the budgets that they were made on. Not for the budgets at the time in which for the budgets that they were made on at the time they were being made. Comparable to today, he couldn't do it. But he's still a viable filmmaker. The problem is, nobody wants to fund a movie like this. They want to fund the next Iron Man. They want to reboot that so they can continue milking that cow because it's almost a guaranteed moneymaker. This film will not make money. This film will lose money. But as the years go by, it will grow in its respect. People will come back to it. People will say, this is a moment in time when Martin Scorsese really touched on something and grabbed a hold of the American sensibility and shook it. And I don't know if this is a masterpiece. I don't know if this is a great film. I do know that as I walked out of it, I was affected. I do know that as I walked out of it, I was hopeful for both cinema, but also the species and its understanding of stories that need to be told, historical stories that need to be told. With this film and Oppenheimer, I think you have an ember, a glowing ember of hope for American and worldwide cinema. Oppenheimer is a great film. Oppenheimer is a masterpiece. I think I would be surprised if 10 years from now we had to reassess that view. But right now, it stands as a masterpiece. Even though I agree with Spike Lee that I would have liked to have seen the effect on Japan in that film. I would have liked to see 5 or 10 minutes on that. I agree with that, but the film is the film. Is Killers of the Flower Moon one of the best films of the year? I can't even speak to that because, to be honest, I don't see new films in the way that I used to. Do you?
No. No.
So it would be, I think, and I was thinking about this yesterday when I was trying to figure out what I was going to talk about and what I wanted to say. One of the points that I did want to make was what are the best films? What do the best films of the year mean anymore? Because there's a film on Amazon right now with Tommy Lee Jones and Jamie Foxx. It's some kind of a courtroom drama. Now that's a film that would have been in theaters for 2 months, and it's on Amazon right now.
Never heard of it.
I just know that it's Jamie Foxx is a lawyer and Tommy Lee Jones is his client. That's all I know about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, the point, and that is the point. You've never heard of it.
Right.
The point is, this is something that we would have seen in previews. This is something that we would have seen in a theater. I have nothing that I'm really looking forward to. This film is, I think we are definitely seeing the slow, maybe not the death, but the slow life support of cinema.
This is...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I just imagine that quality filmmaking will be told in long-form television. Things like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, Deadwood, The Sopranos, that kind of thing. And even the ones that I just said are dated. All of that shit is dated. I don't think the movie watching experience, the theatrical movie watching experience, is completely dead. But I do not think that we will see films like Oppenheimer and Killers of the Flower Moon again in the near future. I highly doubt that. It breaks my heart. I hate to say it, but I would be lying if I didn't.
We're for sure entering into... This is now a period where the directors of the 70s...
Oh, this is a good point.
The stars of the 70s we're going to see them start to die.
Yeah.
And...
Well, I mean, you pointed out, Friedkin just passed. Last month.
Yeah.
Friedkin.
Yeah, William Friedkin.
Yeah.
Like, William Friedkin is dead. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly. Gone.
That's it. There's no more of that bravado.
Yeah.
And it's left on the screen. This may be Scorsese's last film.
Entirely possible, yes.
You see in the music of this film, Robbie Robertson. You
Oh my
see his
God, yeah.
influence. He just died not too long ago.
Yeah.
The band, then go back to Last Waltz with Scorsese. This might be, that's the end of the band. This might be his last waltz. I was watching this film, listening. There's a moment. There's Charlie Patton, and you think about the blues. You think about Scorsese's love of the blues, but you also think about the tie-in of Charlie Patton, part Native American,
Yeah.
Delta blues. You think about that documentary, which we haven't talked about yet, Rumble, the Native American influence on music, on popular music, rock and roll, and popular music in the United States. Robert Robertson included. From the First Nations of the North. This is something that people take for granted. Oh, this is just another movie, and it's like, okay, yeah, okay, but it's not just another movie, because this is kind of like, these are these markers along the way. And the other day, Leslie and I were having coffee, and we were talking about, she is a great connoisseur or connoisseuse of I Love Lucy. She loves I Love Lucy. And she's an expert on I Love Lucy. And we were talking about when Lucille Ball passed away. And I said, oh, that must have been around, I said, I think it's around 1989, something like 89, 90. I said, because in my memory, I feel like it was like her. Then a few months later, Jim Henson and Sammy Davis Jr. I don't know which one came next, but it was kind of like, and these old stars, they would go to Cedars-Sinai to die. And I remember, like, my mom used to subscribe to the Star magazine, that gossip rag. And and there would always be these stories of, Roy Orbison and dying, or all these people. So it was mostly like celebrity type of Star magazine, celebrity stuff. And that was like her junk food. She used to like it, and she would do the crosswords, etc. And there was like a grittiness to the pages, and if we think about decades ago, when you would think about people from a different era of Hollywood, you think about how they died. Think about these people from the past, and they died, and it's like, oh yeah, that person, that's old star, died. Well, that's going to start happening to people that we still think of as vibrant. These are now the old lions of cinema from the 70s. Then it's going to be the people from the 90s, well, the 80s, and then the 90s. When Tarantino passes away, or you know what I mean, when and eventually, obviously it's all going to happen. But what's going to be the state of cinema? This is definitely a turning of the page that we're seeing, because the way you describe it, and the way when we look through the films that we thought defined the decades, we saw all these transitions that happened over the course of this century and change that we've seen. What are the changes that are going to come? We don't know. But this is definitely to see, and the way you described Scorsese talking about the end of Kurosawa, the end of that era, of that chapter, and now we're seeing potentially the end of the Scorsese era. Clint Eastwood is teetering on the edge.
Making his last film as we speak.
We are entering an age that we should celebrate these achievements, these careers,
Yeah.
these artistic legacies. And we'll see what's to come, but we are definitely going to acknowledge, you and I and our listeners are going to acknowledge what we've been lucky enough to have witnessed through these careers. And all we can do is just watch them and talk about them and enjoy them. Not all cinema has to be, the idea of like, okay, this is popcorn versus this is not everything. I don't think I'm of the Oscar Wilde school. I think I do believe that art is, it can just be for art's sake.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that it has to be some kind of American pop culture self-help thing where it like teaches you a lesson or makes you a better entrepreneur or makes you make more money or makes you skinnier or hotter or whatever. I think it can just be beautiful, whatever that means, because there are different forms of beauty, even in ugliness, so-called ugliness. The idea is that you're watching a creative vision. That's what you would hope for, not just ideas that are going to make money. There's a difference between a vision and an idea. And there's a difference between an aesthetic and an expression of an idea or an expression of a theme or an expression of a feeling or etc. There's a difference between that and, oh, this would be cool if, and now all I need is funding and an audience, and here we are off to the races. Sometimes the best cinema is looking out your fucking window at the wind blowing through the trees. Sometimes the best cinema is some director whose name you can't pronounce shooting through a window at the wind blowing through trees. Because it elevates, as Oscar Wilde said, art elevates reality.
It absolutely does. I think you and I have gone back and forth a lot of times arguing the point of cinema.
And we will continue. As if it has a point, yeah.
Yeah.
And as if it needs one.
Yeah. And it really comes down to each his own. And it's like what resonates with you might be different than what resonates with me. But I think at the end of the day, the point of all of it, do I feel that I am better for having seen this? Even if I feel worse about it, even if it hit me with something that I didn't necessarily want to know, there are certain truths, and some of life is beautiful, and some of it is incredibly ugly. But to hide away from it, to pretend that it doesn't exist, is simplistic and foolish. For 8+ years, and I think you at least almost 8 of those years, we've been doing this podcast. We've been talking about these movies. We've been talking about the things that both inspire us and trying to understand what inspires the artist, the filmmaker, the actors, the writers, the cinematographers, and the people who listen. What we do here, some people can dismiss as two guys talking.
Well, it's the art of the conversation.
It is the art of the conversation. This is my dinner with Andre. This is This is two people with a passion. And I hope that we continue to discuss people and artists who have a passion. Scorsese is going to be gone one day, probably sooner than later. So will Spielberg, Coppola, Herzog. The best that we can hope is that there was somebody watching them who will be inspired in such a way as to tell that story, to pick that ball up and keep moving it forward. I'm incredibly hopeful about storytelling. I'm just not sure about the medium. Killers of the Flower Moon may be one of the last great statements. I don't know. But it's beautiful, and I can't wait to see it again. And I'm looking forward to sitting down again and letting it wash over me in a different way than the first. I think it's definitely a film we're going to be talking about in the future. And I'm glad that there are people out there who are willing to give it that respect. So, that being said, we want to say thank you to someone for donating this past month. Remember, what we do is a labor of love, but you can help out. You can throw a little bit of cash our way. You can look into this holiday season and say, you know what, Ramos and Chavez, they're busting their asses to get their emotions. They're laying it out there, and they're doing it for us. They're doing it for themselves because they're selfish bastards, but we're benefiting from it as well. So do what you can. Go and get that credit card. Go to buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos and give whatever you can. The holidays are coming up and we could really use it. That being said, we want to say thank you, and we're going to continue this month with an examination of films that I think are they speak to me, Rick Ramos. In December, we'll do the same thing for Mr. Chavez. It's going to be a real great way to close the year out, and we got some great things prepared for you in January through February, March, April. There ain't no stopping us. So, you want to hear more? buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos. Thank you for your support. Bye-bye now.